Hello students, today we'll be doing a new poem, A Legend of the Northland, written by Phoebe Carey. Now, A Legend of Northland is a ballad. A ballad is a poem narrating a story in short stanzas. In fact, this poem is a legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed. Now, let me explain this poem stanza-wise. Away, away in the Northland. This poem starts with this line, away, away in Northland. Now students, this place Northland is a very cold place situated near the North Pole, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. In Northland, days are short and nights are long, that people are tired of sleeping. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows. Now students, reindeer is an animal which lives in cold region, and sledges means a means of transportation in ice-clad areas which is pulled by a reindeer. And the children looks like a bear's cub in their funny furry clothes. Well, in these two lines, the poet is trying to say that children looks very cute and funny. In fact, they look like a bear's cub when they put on furry, warm clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true. In Northland, people narrate to the children very interesting stories, but the poet feels that all the stories are not true. It's just fictional. And yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. But yet the poet believes that all those stories has a moral lesson. Hence, I will narrate the tale or the story to you all. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching, just as he did, Preaching means teaching about religious matters. So, the story is of a time when Saint Peter used to live in this world and he used to walk from one place to the other preaching. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Hearth is a place where people bake cakes, cookies, etc. So, as Saint Peter was traveling, he came to a cottage where he saw a little woman was baking cakes on the hearth. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Since Saint Peter was traveling for the whole day, he was very tired and hungry. So when he saw this woman baking cake, he asked a single cake from her. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. When Saint Peter asked for a little cake, she agreed to bake a cake for him. So she took a small portion of her dough and baked a very small cake for him. But while it was being baked, she felt that the cake wasn't small. In fact, it was too large to give away. So she didn't want to give the cake to him. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one. So this time, she took a very little amount of dough to make the cake. But it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. But however, when the cake got baked again, she felt that it was too big to give away like the first one. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat. Now she took a very tiny amount of dough to make the cake and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. Well, even this time she couldn't give away the cake to Saint Peter. For she said, "My cakes that seems too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away." So she put them on the shelf. The old woman said that, "When I eat the cake myself, it appears to be very small. But when I have to give the cake away to somebody, I feel the cakes are very large." Hence she doesn't give away the cake, rather puts it on the shelf. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint. So this act of the greedy woman angered Saint Peter, for he was hungry, and secondly he found the greedy woman's attitude very bad. And surely such woman was enough to provoke a saint. So the greediness of the old woman annoyed the Saint Peter. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm." Since Saint Peter was very angry, he said, "You do not deserve to live in a human form. God has given you everything. You have food to eat. You have house to give you shelter, and you have wood to keep you warm. Still, you are so selfish that you are not ready to give away such a small cake to your fellow human being. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food, and boring all day in the hard, dry wood." So Saint Peter said that you do not deserve to live as a human. Hence, you should spend the rest of your life as a bird. And every day you should struggle to get small amount of food by boring, that is, digging into the dry, hard wood. Then she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. As soon as Saint Peter cursed the old woman, she got transformed into a bird, that is a woodpecker, and came out flying from the chimney top of her house. She had a scarlet cap on her head. Now, the old woman, before being transformed into a bird, was wearing a red cap on her head. But even after her transformation into a bird, she still had a scarlet cap on her head. And that was left the same, which means only her cap was left the same, but her physique, her appearance had totally changed. Earlier, she was a woman. Now, she has become a bird. But all the rest of her clothes were burned, black as a coal in the flame. This two-line means all the clothes were burned. And every country schoolboy over here, country means rural area or village, has seen her in the wood where she lives in the tree till this day, boring for food. So these little village schoolboys says that they still see her in the wood working so hard every day to find the food. So now let's discuss about the poetic devices that has been used in this poem, A Legend of the Northland. Now the first poetic device is rhyme scheme. Students, rhyme scheme is the pattern of rhymes at the end of each line of a poem. In fact, it is very easy to find the rhyme scheme. All you need to do is to see the last word. So let's try to find out the rhyme scheme of the first stanza. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. So let's mark the last words of each line of this stanza. The first word is Northland. The second one is few. The third is winter. The fourth one is through. So now let's mark Northland as A, few as B, winter C. In fact, ABC has been used since none of these words are rhyming. Now the last one is through. Well, students, few and through are rhyming. Hence, we will mark through as B. So, the rhyme scheme will be ABCB. So, in this manner, you can find the rhyme scheme of the other stanzas as well. Well, now the second literary devices that has been used is alliteration. Alliteration means repetition of a consonant sound in close connection. A lot of alliteration is used in this poem. In stanza 1, see the last line. That they cannot sleep them through. That they. The sound is repeated here. In stanza 2, see the second line, third line and fourth line. Sledges when it snows. Sledges, snows. Saw sound is repeated. Looks like bear's cub. Looks like. La sound is repeated. In their funny furry cloths. Funny, furry. Fur sound is repeated. In stanza 3rd, they tell them a curious story. They tell them. The sound is being repeated. And yet you may learn a lesson in this line too. Examples of alliteration can be found. Yet, you. Your sound is repeated. May learn a lesson. Learn a lesson. La sound is repeated. In stanza 6, and being faint with fasting. Faint with fasting. Fa sound is repeated. For the day was almost done. Day, done. Da sound is repeated. In stanza 8, and still a smaller one. Still smaller. Sa sound is repeated. In stanza 9, then she took a tiny scrap of dough. Took, tiny. Ta sound is repeated. In stanza 10, my cakes that seems too small. Seem small. Sa sound is repeated. In stanza 11, the good Saint Peter grew angry. Good grew. Ga sound is repeated. Then we have stanza 13. Now you shall build as the birds do. Build birds. Ba sound is repeated. So students, this repetition of a consonant sound in close connection is alliteration. Now, the next literary device used is repetition. When words are repeated, this is repetition. In stanza 1, away, away in Northland. This word away is being repeated, so it is a repetition. In stanza 9, and rolled it flat. Rolled is repeated here. In stanza 13, by boring and boring and boring. As you can see, this word boring has been repeated thrice. Again, in stanza 16, the same word boring has been repeated 2 times. Boring and boring for food. The next poetic device used is simile. Students, simile means comparison using words like or as. In stanza 2, and the children looks like bear's cub. So when children wear clothes made of fur, they look like a bear's cub. Hence, a comparison has been made between children and bear's cub. Simile is also used in stanza 9. And baked it thin as a wafer. So, the cake that the greedy old woman made is being compared to a wafer. In stanza 13, now you shall build as the birds do. So, a comparison has been made between the woman and the bird. In stanza 15, black as a coal in the flame. Over here, the color of woman is being compared to the color of the coal. So I hope you all must have understood this poem very clearly. Till we meet again, stay home, stay safe.